We begin this morning with weather. This morning, 56 million people are under wind chill alerts from the Dakotas to Maine, and it's all as the East Coast braces for what the National Weather Service predicts will be an epic generational Arctic outbreak.
Yeah, and in Maine, warming centers are now open as that state prepares for bitterly cold temperatures that could bring wind chills of negative 60 degrees. And in a rare move, Boston Public Schools canceled classes today due to the extreme cold. This comes as parts of the South are still thawing out after a deadly ice storm shut down travel and left thousands in the dark there. Meteorologist Angie Lassman has the full forecast in just a couple minutes, but we begin with NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda in Boston.
Hey there. Well, right now it's about just above 20 degrees here in Boston. The wind is packing a punch as well, but this is actually the warmest it's going to be for the rest of the day as temperatures are set to topple every hour into dangerously low levels. You can see it's pretty quiet here in Boston. Schools across the city canceled as officials are warning people to stay out of what could be some of the coldest weather parts of the region have seen in decades. It will feel like minus 20 in Chicago today. Tomorrow in Boston, wind chill of 30 below. And get this, a jaw-dropping minus 60 wind chill in northern Maine, where the National Weather Service is calling it an epic generational Arctic outbreak. As I mentioned before, schools canceled here in Boston. They declared a cold weather emergency. Schools also shuttered in Buffalo. They're using signs there to warn people of the danger to come, the potentially life-threatening cold. And that city's just coming off of weeks later a deadly blizzard. Now, as we see this Arctic air move in, the South is still thawing out from its week-long icy storm that claimed the lives of at least 8 people and left a tangled mess of power lines and trees. Austin Energy telling its customers it can't say when to expect widespread power restoration. Now, back here in Boston, I did mention we're bracing for that bone-chilling wind chill of 30 below tomorrow. But to put that in perspective, you know, that's actually fairly mild when you look at what nearby New Hampshire at Mount Washington is looking forward to. Minus 100 wind chill paired with 100-mile-per-hour winds. So I suppose I should be saying it could be worse. I'll send it back to you guys.
Ooh, all right, Emily Ikeda, thank you.
For more on this, let's get a check at your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, Mount Washington is known for having horrible weather, so at least we're not there. Instead, though, we're going to be dealing with the Arctic air that's spilling in from the north, and you can see exactly what's going on. There's a frigid Canadian high, the circulation around that dragging in all of this cold air that's impacting folks from basically the Dakotas all the way to Maine, where we have those alerts up right now. This is going to be some of the coldest air that we've seen, not just this season, but in some time. Places are looking at the past 5-6 years not having temperatures as cold as this. We'll wait and see how many records are broken, but there is a potential that we could see some of those being broken by the time Saturday morning rolls around. There's those alerts that are up, wind chill advisories and warnings for 56 million people. And meanwhile, 100 million people are going to see values below zero. So it's going to be bitter cold, even if you don't see an advisory or a warning up for your area. Check out these temperatures. They're brutal in many spots. Charleston feels like 16 degrees. Detroit feels like -9. Chicago, 17 below. And you look at places like Minneapolis and Marquette, they're more than 20 degrees below zero. And that's right now. And if you're looking to the Northeast and saying, well, 27 in New York doesn't sound so bad, it will get worse. 10 degrees as we get into the early hours of tomorrow. And we add in those winds that are quite blustery. And that means -7 is what you'll wake up to. We're going to look at the potential to break some records in places like Boston. Out of LaGuardia Airport, we could see a record-breaking temperature tomorrow morning for that low temperature. -15 in Buffalo for what it feels like, but the actual temperature will be at 3 degrees. If you don't like what you see, just wait a day or so, because by the time we get into Sunday, it's going to feel like a whole different kind of world out there in places like New York. It'll be back to the mid-40s, 50s by Monday. Cleveland included in that as well. Low 40s by the time Sunday and Monday roll around at 53 degrees on Tuesday. If you look towards Roanoke, 62. That seems like spring in my book. But notice that those wind gusts will inch closer to 30, 40 miles per hour. You heard Emily say that there will be some areas, especially higher elevations, that see much higher wind gusts than that. And don't be surprised if you see a few flakes. We are expecting some snowfall just along and downwind of those lakes. Of course, when we have such strong winds and it's so cold, that's not hard for us to see. I don't want to leave the south out because we do have that cold front that we've been dealing with for days. days and days finally exiting, but it's bringing some heavy rain to folks in the southeast, so just be mindful of that. If you are in the south central United States, you've had a busy couple of days, but you're finally going to get a little bit of a February thaw happening. It'll be mild as we go into the next few days as well. And we look to the west, you guys have some rain and even some snow. And good news, guys, I know this is what everybody was talking about a couple of weeks ago. All that rain from that atmospheric river out west, it really helped us. If we look at California's drought monitor, you don't see any of that bright red or dark red, which is the extreme or exceptional drought. We've made major improvements. 33% of the state does remain in a severe drought, but we need those storms to keep continuing, because if they stop, then we go back into the drought. But good news there.
Yeah. I was going to say, nice to have some good news amid all of the Arctic blasts.
See what I did there?
Yes.
I do. I appreciate that. You know it's bad when Boston schools are shutting down. That's incredible. All right.
Angie Lasman, thank you. And overnight, China says it's looking into U.S. claims that one of its high-altitude spy balloons has been flying over U.S. soil for the past couple of days. Pentagon officials say they decided against shooting it down, citing safety concerns. The discovery comes just days ahead of a planned visit to China by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer has the latest from Beijing.
Good morning. Pentagon officials confirmed they have detected what they call a Chinese spy balloon hovering over Billings, Montana. It's traveling at an altitude much higher than commercial air traffic, so it doesn't pose any military or physical risk to people on the ground. But F-22 fighter jets were sent up to track it, and President Biden was briefed and was advised to not shoot it down because the debris could pose a threat to people on the ground. The question, of course, is why is there a Chinese spy balloon over the U.S.? And what could it possibly be seeing that isn't picked up by China's network of low-orbit satellites? Now, Montana is home to one of 3 Air Force bases that maintains and operates intercontinental ballistic missiles. As well, Canadian officials say that they're monitoring with NORAD a potential second incident. They say they're in frequent contact with officials in the U.S. As far as China is concerned, officials here in Beijing at the Foreign Ministry say they are still gathering and verifying information about this suspected balloon. And they add that China is a country that, quote, acts in accordance with international law and has no intention to violate any country's sovereignty or airspace. But this is all adding tension to an already strained relationship between the U.S. and China, as Secretary of State Antony Blinken is en route to Beijing to have rare face-to-face meetings with Chinese officials and possibly with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It's the first visit to China by a Secretary of State in 6 years, and there will certainly be a lot to talk about. Guys.
A lot to talk about, Janice. Thank you so much. And the footage you saw in that piece of the balloon was shot by a colleague from NBC's Montana affiliate KULR on February 1st. She initially received calls at the station that something was in the sky and went outside to go check it out and took the video outside the station in Billings, Montana.
To Ukraine now, where that country is picking up the pieces after another Russian strike hit an apartment building in the eastern part of the country. That attack comes as Ukrainian officials say Russia is planning a new offensive to coincide with the one-year anniversary of the war. NBC News foreign correspondent Ralph Sanchez has the latest and a warning. Parts of this report may be distressing to some viewers.
Unrelenting Russian rocket fire targeting the eastern Ukrainian city Kramatorsk. This apartment building ripped open by a direct hit, killing at least 3 people, Ukraine says. And in overwhelmed hospitals, a struggle to treat the wounded. The last thing I remember is that I was combing the cat, she says. Days after the U.S. and Germany announced they'll send tanks to Ukraine, Russia's President Putin issuing veiled nuclear threats, warning the West, we don't send our tanks to their borders, but we have the means to respond. Ukraine's President Zelensky says Putin is preparing a new offensive ahead of the war's one-year anniversary.
We have been standing against evil for almost a year.
And may strike from the south or the east near Bakhmut. Fewer than 200 children are left in the city, police say, and they're trying to evacuate them in these kid-sized bulletproof vests. The vests come from the Lviv Defense Cluster, from a team that usually makes armor for NATO Special Forces. 9-year-old Angelica, who fled fighting in her home city of Kharkiv, demonstrates for us.
Such vests you can put on in several seconds.
A wartime innovation designed to save the lives of the littlest Ukrainians. Meanwhile, Poland has become the first NATO country to say it's open to sending Ukraine F-16 fighter jets, but only in coordination with allies.
All right, Raf, thanks so much.
Now to the congressional drama in Washington, where this morning Minnesota Democrat Ilhan Omar remains defiant after Republicans took the dramatic step of voting to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Is anyone surprised that I am somehow deemed unworthy to speak about American foreign policy, or that they see me as a powerful voice that needs to be silenced? My leadership and voice will not be diminished if I am not on this committee for one term.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says the move was in response to Omar's past comments, which both Republicans and Democrats condemned as anti-Semitic comments Omar later apologized for. For more, we're joined by NBC News Congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin. So, Julie, the White House has called this a political stunt. How are House Democrats responding?
Yeah, there were a series of impassioned speeches on the floor yesterday as lawmakers from both sides of the aisle debated this issue just ahead of the vote that ultimately led to Ilhan Omar, that congresswoman from Minnesota, to be booted off the powerful Foreign Affairs Committee for several anti-Semitic comments that she has made in the past and apologized for. And her Democratic colleagues took to the floor in support. I want you to take a listen to what one of them had to say, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Don't tell me this is about consistency. Don't tell me that this is about a condemnation of anti-Semitic remarks when you have a member of the Republican caucus who has talked about Jewish space lasers and an entire amount of tropes, and also elevated her to some of the highest committee assignments in this body.
So, of course, she's talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez there is talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, the member who Democrats actually had to boot off of committees because of her remarks about Jews, anti-Semitic tropes that she had made, comments about 9/11 as well. Now Marjorie Taylor Greene is back on powerful committees, including Oversight and Homeland. So, of course, Democrats seeing this as historically hypocrisy from Republicans.
Yeah, saying it's a double standard on their end. I mean, Julie, we got to mention the vote to remove Omar almost did not happen. Originally, not all Republicans wanted to take her off the Foreign Affairs Committee. That's important to point out. So what was going on behind the scenes, and what exactly changed?
Yeah, exactly, Zinkley. When we started this week, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, didn't have the vote to boot Ilhan Omar off of this committee. That's because several Republicans spoke out, including lawmakers like Victoria Spartz, Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and Ken Buck from Colorado. All of them got concessions from Speaker McCarthy, which is, I think, very significant that McCarthy used his limited political capital to make this happen. He conceded to those members that there will be some kind of bipartisan process in the future, that Ilhan Omar will be able to repeal this somehow with the House Ethics Panel, which is why one member, actually a Republican from Ohio, voted present. He's on the Ethics Committee and wants to make sure that there is due process here for Omar.
And Julie, you're in D.C. It's no secret the House is seemingly as divided as ever. Speaker McCarthy, who we were just talking about, is proposing actually creating a panel to come up with a code of conduct for members sitting on committees. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was one of those concessions he made to those three members. And look, it's not clear if Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, is going to take him up on this. But just in the few weeks that this Congress has been running in the House, we've seen really just partisan entanglements on these powerful committees. It's not clear that they're able to run them effectively. I've heard from lawmakers on both sides expressing concern just over this partisan bickering. And so Kevin McCarthy is proposing a bipartisan commission to examine now and in the future any member who makes any sort of comment or rules by which these members will then be able to be booted off these committees, to make sure it's not as much of a partisan process in the future as we've seen in the last 2 years, both under Democrats and Republicans. So again, not clear if this commission is ever going to come to light, but it's certainly a nice idea that McCarthy had.
A lot to watch out for. Julie Sirkin, thank you.
All right, let's turn now to the classified documents saga. And the latest developments are about former Vice President Mike Pence after documents marked classified were recently found inside Pence's Indiana home. The Wall Street Journal reports the FBI is expected to search the house to see if there are any more classified materials there. According to the Journal, the Justice Department is in talks with Pence's legal team about scheduling that search. For the latest, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning to you. So those first documents found at Pence's home, those were, of course, returned to the National Archives. But what do we know about this search that's being scheduled right now?
Well, we should note that NBC News has not independently confirmed this report, but the Wall Street Journal is citing people familiar with this expected search, saying it could take place in the coming days. And what we've seen in the last couple of months of how these federal agents, when they go to homes to search, we don't typically learn about it in advance. And that's usually because that's an agreement between the DOJ and then whichever party is participating in it and the personal attorneys. They usually say if there isn't a search warrant and if this is something that's cooperative, okay, we will let you come and do this. That's what we saw happen exactly at the Wilmington Square home of President Biden when they went to search for additional classified material and recovered some. So we don't know the exact situation here when it comes to former Vice President Pence because their team is not commenting. We've reached out to them. We've reached out to the DOJ for guidance as well, and they have not been able to provide any. But this comes as just the latest development in this ever-evolving classified document saga that now involves the current president, the former president, and the former vice president, as other former top officials are conducting their own searches and working with the National Archives to see if there's any other classified information where it shouldn't be, Stephen.
All right, Monica, let's turn now to the Biden administration. And we know Brian Deese, the administration's one of the chief economic planners who helped shape the Biden economic policy over his first 2 years in office, announced his departure. So what do we know about this?
Yeah, and it follows the news that we reported last week about the chief of staff, Ron Klain, who is exiting with the new chief of staff, Jeff Zients, starting shortly after the State of the Union. And this is something that you typically see about 2 years into an administration. You start to see some of this turnover, some of these key senior officials sign on and say, I'm maybe only going to do the first half of a first term because they have other obligations or they want to spend more time with their family. So I think we can actually expect to see a little bit more of this in the coming weeks and months. And that's also because potentially, depending on when this announcement could come, if the president does decide to run again, there's also sometimes a shift from some of the key players inside the White House to go outside and help from out there in terms of efforts as a campaign could start to be built before a potential reelection bid is formally announced, Stephen.
And speaking of the look ahead to 2024, we know President Biden and Vice President Harris heading to Philadelphia, where they're expected to speak at the Democratic National Committee's winter meeting. And of course, there's been a discussion of changing up the primary voting schedule that'll be discussed there. What else can we expect from this meeting?
Yeah, and this follows an event that the president and vice president are going to have today in Philadelphia, as you mentioned, on infrastructure. And it comes after two events this week in Baltimore and New York City with that similar focus. So they're going to be talking about replacing lead pipes today. Then they will be attending this DNC winter meeting where we do to debate the primary calendar. This is something that they had already preliminarily approved, changing up the order. Remember, it used to be Iowa, New Hampshire. Now it's going to be a little bit different with South Carolina first, which was a key state back when candidate Joe Biden was running to be president. And so they will be talking about what they feel they've been able to accomplish in these last couple of years. And then I expect the president to talk about all the work he says they feel they have left to do, Stephen.
Definitely something to watch. South Carolina was seismic for the 2020 election. All right, Monica, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.